You're getting fancy.
I know.
We got more stuff underneath our names.
Every week, I like to change it up for you.
You do. It's always a surprise. And if everybody wants to see all the stuff Scott's adding under our names, go watch the videos on YouTube. Because
there you go.
We've been doing that. And Scott, I have been embedding them as well in our blog posts. So if you're subscribed to the RSS feeder, I even noticed the link does show up in the show notes in different podcatchers where there's like a video header now, and then there's a link to the video on YouTube if you actually want to see us discussing topics and all of our hand waving and flailing and all of that.
I'm a big hand talker, so yeah.
I am too. Maybe I don't. Yeah, I feel like I do too, and I forget because we're looking at each other, and sometimes when I'm talking, I talk with my hands, and I'm like, wait a minute, people on the podcast can't always see my hands.
Well, now they can if they go to YouTube, easy enough. Or if they want to see us goof around in real time, they can also come over and join us on Discord, msclouditpro.com/membership. And look at that. I put a plug in. Let's go ahead and...
We had a party here the other week, too. We had like 8 people. And then the last 2 weeks, there's been nobody.
Yeah,
that's up and down. Anywho, come join us.
It's okay. We shall power through. So I've got some things I want to talk to you about this week. I think you've brought a bunch to me the last couple of weeks between Loop and listener questions and all that kind of stuff. So it is time for me to get up on my soapbox. But first, maybe a couple news things before we get too deep in.
Yes, and it is not going to be Loop related because I have a whole bunch more thoughts, but I'm tired of talking about Loop. So, news things. I saw this one the other day, Scott, and I don't believe we talked about it, but I think it's one that people should absolutely be aware of in that there is a bunch of Exchange PowerShell deprecation stuff going on. So September of 2022, so end of last year, they made the REST-based Exchange Online PowerShell v3 module available. And this is Exchange Online Management for those of you that are installing it, which I think v3 is just an upgrade of the v1 and the v2. But there are also people still using the new PS session. So it's essentially a new remote PowerShell session through Exchange Online. That was the original way to write PowerShell. But the new PS session, the Exchange Online PowerShell version 1, version 2 are all being deprecated. Essentially, they're turning off remote PowerShell for Exchange Online. The V1 deprecation will be completed by January of 2023. That was already come and gone. V2 deprecation will be completed by July of 2023. So that one is still coming up. The remote PowerShell session, the RPS protocol, will be deprecated in June of 2023. So June 1, 2023, they're going to start blocking those remote PowerShell session connections. They're going to block RPS for all tenants by July 1, 2023. So after that, if you're using any of these older modules or the new PS session, it's going to break. So if you have old Exchange Online PowerShell scripts that you created, old Azure Automation runbooks, whatever you may have created years ago that's still using new PS session, or servers that you just don't go in and update the Exchange modules on, you're going to want to go do that before July of this year.
Yes. So there's a couple blog posts out there about this as well. I'll put both a link to the old one and the new one in show notes, just so folks can kind of follow along from the initial announcement and then what changed a little bit coming over to the new one. A really good thing here that I see is having a little bit of empathy for customers in the way this one's going down. Not only in like the way they announced it, hey, let's give a little bit of notice. But one of the design goals is for this new module, while it's not running under remote PowerShell, like it's not using RPS in the background, the intent is to have full compatibility with the existing set of capabilities in the current cmdlets. So the current modules and kind of the whole underlying set of cmdlets that are there. So I think that's all really good because you're not going to lose functionality, and you potentially just have to swap protocols, which makes it a little bit easier for you. So from a login flow perspective, things are going to change the way you connect and disconnect. But, under the seams, it's really, hey, I was connecting to a remote PowerShell endpoint, and now I'm connecting to a REST API. And either way, I'm just getting a bearer token back, and then I'm working with APIs after that.
Yes, this is not nearly as drastic or as much of a cognitive load as like the switch from the Azure AD PowerShell to Graph PowerShell.
No,
from
this
that
one
perspective,
is
like
orders of magnitude different.
Yes. Yeah, much more feature parity. It's just make sure you're not using that remote PowerShell session and make sure that your modules are upgraded.
Yes. And another thing to keep in mind with this one is I know sometimes updating scripts is, like trivial work that just gets on the backlog and then it gets bumped down over time because more important things come up and you got to do the new thing, roll out the new initiative, whatever it is. There is that kind of target date, right? Of, hey, let's get this done by September. And you're going to want to be done by the end of September 2023 because there's no exceptions to go ahead and say, hey, extend it and give me RPS in my tenancy longer.
Yeah, there's like they have that on the timeline too on this newer blog post of once you hit that September, there's no opt-out, there's no re-enablement of anything. You're cut off.
Yes.
Completely, entirely.
'Tis a consideration for folks that are out there.
Yes. So you said this isn't jarring, but there is something else that was a little jarring that you mentioned, and I noticed the other day, and it didn't jar me as much because I've done this, but have you gone in recently and clicked on Azure AD in a Microsoft 365 Admin Center?
I haven't, but to be honest, I sometimes forget that Microsoft 365 exists, like in the admin center, because I don't do it day to day anymore. I live in Azure day to day, and it's a different world for me. So sometimes when I read about things like this, I'm like, they're doing what to the what? Like they can't do that. So yes, the Azure AD Admin Center. I did go and look when I saw the articles popping up about it because I completely missed the Message Center post about it as well, is moving to the Entra Admin Center. So you're going from the Azure AD Admin Center to the Microsoft Azure, the Microsoft Entra, Admin Center. So now you have Azure Active Directory basically as a set of pages and tabs kind of under Entra and that whole experience, which makes sense. Like it's been there for a while. It's been in both. So why bifurcate it and have customers go to two places? I think, the first time I saw it, I was like, they're doing what to what? And they're getting rid of the Azure AD Admin Center and they're making all of us use Entra, like even Azure customers. And that's not what's happening. It's the Azure AD Admin Center that was in the M365 Admin Center, and that view of it is collapsing into Entra formally.
Yeah, and you sent this article over to me, and kind of like you, I kind of seen this, I kind of read it, but I've been in Entra enough. I didn't think about it a whole lot. And I even went through the experience the other day, and I was kind of like one of those, okay.
I think something is different here.
It was about, yeah. And if you go look at, like, I just popped open my admin center. So I just went to admin.microsoft.com. And if you hover over Azure Active Directory in your list of admin centers, it is now pointing to entra.microsoft.com and then a whole bunch of query parameters and everything after that. And that's, to your point, that's the only place that's actually changing. Is it's not that Azure AD or the Azure Admin Center is getting replaced by Entra. It's that the link in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center is going someplace different now. If you go to aad.portal.azure.com, you still go to Azure Active Directory. If you go to portal.azure.com and search for Azure Active Directory and go there, you'll still go to your standard Azure Active Directory. It'll be interesting. I am curious if they actually change those over time, and it does become Entra for everything everywhere, because really all Entra is it's slightly different navigation to get around all the stuff you can get to already in Azure Active Directory. Just the menus are organized differently, but then they have added in like the permission management stuff, the cloud knocks that we've talked about before. They added in a menu for the new verified ID stuff. But I think from my perspective, like they could legitimately replace all of Azure AD, links, navigation to it, all of that with Entra, and everybody would probably be able to get along just fine.
Should be able to. I think this one's more like FYI. If you don't go into the admin center every day, you could have a little bit of who moved my cheese. And it's not just who moved my cheese, it's who renamed my cheese along the way. I started out as a one nice block of Swiss or whatever over here, and I turned into a nice Parmigiano over on the other side. So yeah, stuff moves, stuff changes. You have to keep up with it. The whole change fatigue thing is real. So, hopefully you're not surprised if you do see it or do run into it. But, certainly if you have like internal wikis or like support articles that your teams use or things like that, say you're like a managed service provider or CSP, something like that, like you might want to go update those and, prep people and say, hey, stuff's changing again.
Yeah. Well, and it's only the navigation, which I think kind of makes me laugh, because if you go click through all the different menus,
oh yeah,
on the right, it's literally the old Azure AD. It's all the old Azure AD pages loading up in the iframe or in the frame or whatever that construct is to the right. It's only the navigation that has a new look and feel, and it's really so they could add in those couple other extra things. So like you said, it's a shock if you don't go in. It's a little bit of a surprise of where'd everything go. But once you figure out where everything is, you're fine. It's still Azure AD from a settings, configuration, all of that perspective. It's just your navigation you got to go refigure out.
Easy enough to do. You know what else is changing and what you should play around with while you're in the admin center?
The color of my hair. Oh, that's not the admin center, though. I'm trying to keep up with you, Scott.
Good luck. I've been this way for 30 plus years. So Teams. I know you're not a big Windows user, but you might have some customers who use Windows, and there's like one or two customers out there that do have Windows estates that use Microsoft Teams. So there's a new client for Teams that's coming. It's built on a different set of technologies. So rather than being built on Electron and carrying some of the overhead that came with that, it's built on WebView 2 and it's just a little bit of a different underlying technology stack. So you can think of it still as like a web wrapper. That's what it's been for a long time.
Yep.
But because it's using WebView 2, the performance overhead is much, much lower. Like on the order of, you could see like a 50% improvement in CPU consumption. And I don't know if folks have ever like felt like Teams isn't the most performant client that exists out there. But if that's you and you're in that stack, like you might really want to take a look at the new preview client. Like, is it worlds better? Like, I would argue like if they went native, they could probably get like really good, right? Like be closer to the metal, but that's not a choice that anybody's taking. So you got to take what you can get. So it is better. So the new client is a feature. It just becomes a little toggle for your end users in the Teams client itself. It's just a little button. It says try the new Teams, and you can kind of turn it on or off. And you need the ability to turn it on or off as a user, because there's some things that still don't work in the new client and are being transitioned over, but that list is like growing smaller by the day just as they roll out new versions. But to do all of this, you need to go into the Teams Admin Center, and there's a setting in there under your Teams Update Management Policies for Use New Teams Client. And then you can go ahead and select users and groups in your organization who are going to get access to that toggle and be able to play with things. So, if you're heavily dependent on Teams, it's something that you're going to want to think about probably participating in this kind of preview-ish experience, especially if your primary clients are Windows. Like there's tangible benefits for your users if all they need is the set of features that are in the new client.
Yeah, and this is much, if you want a comparison, remember, do they still have this for Outlook? They did something very similar to this when they were working through some of the upgrades, even to the Outlook client, where there's always that little toggle so you can easily flip back and forth between the two experiences. I've kind of been keeping an eye on it. Like you said, I'm on a Mac. This is only Windows right now for this new Teams client. So I have played with it a little bit. I do have some Windows VMs that I have it on, that it's pulled up on so that I can play with it a little bit. The toggle's turned on. And like you said, there are some nice features on it. It does seem like there are some long-awaited features that are coming with the new Teams, particularly around multi-tenancies and some client switching stuff. Like you said, better performance. From what I've seen, it is still by no means not taking a bunch of resources, but it is taking far less resources than it used to.
I will say on my work PC, I've gone from 100% CPU consumption, like solidly anytime I'm in Teams and I have Outlook open, to 99% CPU consumption. So like things are getting a lot better because I can actually like click between my Teams window and Outlook now. It is a quality of life thing. The other thing that I'll put in the show notes is a link over to the docs for this. So over on learn.microsoft.com, there's a great little article over there on the new client itself. It kind of breaks down what's new in Teams, what platforms this is available on, which is really just Windows. And, that's about it. And your mileage is going to be much better if you go ahead and roll with Windows 11 over Windows 10 or some of the older variations of it that might exist over there. It's not available in all the clouds yet. So if you're an EDU customer, I don't believe it's out in GCC. Like there are restrictions that are there. Not available for VDI clients. Not available for Mac clients either, like you mentioned. So a couple rough edges. Also not on web, which is kind of an interesting one. But all those things will kind of get burned down over time as it all gets fixed up and gets ready to go. And like I said, if it works for you, I highly recommend trying it out because it is a smoother experience.
Yeah, so I was just trying to look through to see if there was a good list of what is and is not there.
There is.
That I'm looking forward to.
In that docs article that I linked to, there's a table in there. There's a heading with the table. What features are changing and what's different and known issues. So like there are some behavioral changes here, like toast notifications change colors. Like, all right, great. Like who cares? The way you add a document library to an app as a tab in channels changes a little bit. Like all this stuff is easy enough to get along with. There are some presence issues going on right now. One of the big ones that I noticed is and it's not so much a presence thing, it's more a notification thing. So you know how you can go into your Teams client and you can say, hey, use my native OS notifications? And you can do that today on Windows and Mac and everywhere. Well, in the new client, it's respecting things like do not disturb mode now. So because it's respecting DND and Windows, if you enable DND, you never see like the little window pop up in the corner that says, oh, this meeting started. So I'm actually, I didn't realize how dependent on that little window popping up was, because sometimes you might have a meeting that starts at like 5 after and somebody hops in there at 1 after and you're like, well, why don't we just get started early? Like I'll go hop in.
Right.
Or sometimes you have a meeting that starts at 5 after and it still hasn't started 7 minutes later and you're like, well, I don't need to hop in yet, right? I've got extra time. So I'm not going to be the first one in there. And I miss that window dearly. Like it's forcing me to turn off D&D in Windows, which I don't like to do either because then it's notification bombardment. So I'm trying to find a little bit of a happy medium there. The other awkward one is some of the meeting stuff. So you'll definitely want to like look through like what are the issues in meetings just to make sure that you don't use any of those features. So for example, like there's a bunch of presentation modes in Teams, things like you can do side by side, you can do the new Cameo view and all that. That only works in the old client. It doesn't work in the new client yet. So if you've gotten really used to those, you might have to hop back to the old client. The cool thing is it's just a toggle in the Teams client. So you're just going into the header and you're just turning it on or off. It does have to restart the client when it does that, but it's not a big deal. So the way I've been treating it is like I run in the new Teams client all the time, unless I know I need something in the old Teams client, and I'll flip back automatically. Or in the case of things where you're trying to join maybe like a webinar or something like that doesn't work yet, the client prompts you and it says, hey, I can't do this in this client. Do you want me to return you to the old one? And you just return to the old one.
Got it. Yeah, I was looking through and I found some of these, and the one about the multiple accounts that is in the support documentation is you can't actually sign in to two different or multiple, not just two different, multiple worker school accounts without having to open a bunch of browser profiles. That's the one I want on the Mac. Like, hopefully I don't have to wait too long to get this on the Mac, because frankly, I am tired of the headache that I have with Teams and multiple windows and all of that. Some other ones that I saw that kind of jumped out to me is third-party apps are not working yet.
Yes.
So if you're using some third-party apps, tabs, that one could be a big deal for you. Or if you're doing a bunch of stuff with calling, advanced calling features, call queues, voice-enabled channels, reverse number lookups, contacts and speed dials, boss delegation or shared line appearance. So, Scott, this is why you're not getting my calls anymore, because I can no longer delegate my calls to you.
It's like a bank error in my favor.
Yeah, exactly. Those are some of the things. I think those are the bigger ones. So those are actually just on support.microsoft.com. We can link to that in the show notes too. That they called out directly in the support article versus the Learn documentation, which
I think the Learn one's a little more
exhaustive.
Yes, the Learn one's more exhaustive. One more that I will call out, just because we're kind of calling out rough edges based on experience with it that I ran into. And this is covered in the Learn docs as well. It's all the way down at the bottom of the article. It's under other areas, like things that might be broken in other areas. Sure. If you are a user and you have more than one tenant on your account, so you are signed into your primary tenant plus maybe some guest tenants, if you sign out of your accounts and then you come back and you join a meeting, if you sign out of any one of those tenants and you come back and join a meeting, it won't sign in with your primary tenant by default. So it's kind of like playing just random Russian roulette with what account it's going, what tenancy it's going to kind of land you in. And it gets a little weird because all of a sudden, like, you're a B2B guest in another tenant and you're like, oh wait, I'm in the wrong thing. That doesn't impact just joining meetings. It also impacts the files tab experience. So there's a nice little error message that shows up in the files tab that says like, hey, make sure you're actually seeing files from the team you think you wanted to see, because we might have accidentally shown you files from another tenant that you're signed into and you had access to a team over there. Like, whoa, okay, I got to watch out for that one.
Yeah, that one would get me. I just looked. I am a guest in 17 different tenants and teams. So that would be, and again, for me, some of it's different clients.
It hasn't hit me yet. I've only ever seen my tenant, but I've seen the error messages and the warnings inside the Teams client. So I call it out from like that perspective. Like I don't actually switch tenants a whole lot, and I don't think I have in the last little bit since the new client was made broadly available. So maybe that's why I haven't been impacted by it. But definitely something to keep in mind if you are a single user and you have your kind of primary tenant that you're in day to day, and maybe you swap over to other tenants as well.
Interesting. Yeah, I would definitely want to be careful of that. I don't necessarily want to join client meetings from another client's tenant or something bizarre like that.
Probably not the best look, no.
I'm hoping notifications across all those guests get better too. Like most of my guest tenants all have little red triangles by them because there's something going on. So yeah, I have my fingers crossed that there will be some stuff fixed and upcoming over the course of the next little bit. What else do we have, Scott?
I think that's like new stuff. I got one more thing I want to talk about for a couple minutes if you want to hang out for a few more.
Sure, I've got a few more minutes. I just have documentation to write, and I don't like writing documents, so distract me.
Will do. So deprecation of services in the cloud and kind of how you get notified about those deprecations. So like earlier, we were talking about how maybe Azure AD admin within the Microsoft 365 experience has a little bit of like that who moved my cheese component to it. You as a customer get notified about that through things like the Microsoft 365 admin center and the message center within it and all that good stuff. On the Azure side of the fence, there's a deprecation process there as well, or a retirement process for services or components functionality within Azure. And the way those communications happens, unfortunately, sometimes varies based on like what the component, what it is. Is it, say something like an open source framework hosted in GitHub and not really service? It's not a service you're shutting down, but maybe it's like an SDK or a framework or something like that. And like how you as a customer get notified about all that stuff. So I recently retired a service, not a service, and one of our SDKs for storage. So we recently announced the retirement of our PHP SDK. And it was an interesting exercise for me to see where things fall apart for customers on how they receive our notifications based on how they've configured themselves in Azure. So one of the very first things that happens is when a service is retired is you as a customer should get an email about that. Like, hey, we see you're using this. Like if we have the telemetry on it and we have the capability to inform you, like we're totally going to do that kind of thing. And I'm noticing more and more, and it's not necessarily like a misconfiguration on the customer's part, but I do think it's a little bit of like lack of awareness of the way things work, is the way we send those notifications is they have to be sent to subscriptions. So, you have to pick somebody in the subscription to send it to. So quite often with an Azure subscription, you can have lots of owners in there, and maybe not every owner is actually impactful to that thing. So what we try and do is we try and notify admins and co-admins for subscriptions, which are, I think they're older kind of carryover properties from the old ASM days, but they still totally exist on the Azure side of the fence. So what happens is lots of enterprise customers, I'd be willing to bet like tons of MSPs and CSPs and things do this as well, because it's 100% the right thing to do, is they automate subscription creation and they don't set the admin or the co-admin for their subscription to be real people. They're like some type of automation account or like a service principal, something like that. If I'm putting you to sleep, just let me know.
No, I did not sleep last night.
And I can bring you back.
Yeah. Wake me up.
So you have this kind of, you get into this world where as a customer, the thing that you do is you don't want a human to be the admin or the co-admin for your subscription. And I think that's the right take on it, right? Like you shouldn't want that to be a single human. You'd want it to be a service principal or some type of admin account, like an elevated break glass kind of thing to get in and work with your subscriptions. But those are where the emails go like for these things. So quite often, your admin accounts don't have mailboxes associated with them, especially these non-person admin accounts that are associated with like a service principal. And it has to be an account. It can't be just random email address, anything like that. Like it's the actual email address that's associated with that AD object. So it's this weird like chicken and egg thing. And I was trying to think about, how customers can potentially mitigate some of that and make sure that they always get the email notification. Like what if you do you have to think about maybe standing up a mailbox and like, hey, if I have 10 subscriptions in Azure, sorry, like that account now gets a mailbox that's associated with it and it comes through. Do I have to try and do something funky like, could I catch the incoming message with a transport rule and see like before it even gets to the mailbox, like go ahead and redirect it over someplace else and have it land there? Because I think it's a ton of just cognitive burden as a customer to say like, oh, hey, go follow the tech community blog for your service. Go follow Azure updates. Go follow, Azure.com and the blog over there. Go follow some account on Twitter or Mastodon or wherever it happens to be. Like the way that you as a customer can 100% be informed of when a service is retiring without having to go read a blog is make sure that you have valid routable email addresses on your admins and co-admins for your Azure subscriptions.
Right. Like I was just kind of thinking through this because I've seen the emails. Like I've gotten a bunch of emails recently about run as accounts getting deprecated in Azure automation.
Run as accounts. There was one for Azure web apps today. Yes, these things come out like all the time. Right. And I regularly have customers tell me like, I didn't get the notification, and I see it a lot just in places like tech community and in comments from customers there. Like people just don't see them because they're not configured to get them. And they didn't know it, right? Like I don't think it's the customer's fault.
Yes. Sorry, side topic, Scott, you dropped out of Discord sometime recently.
Oh, did I?
Yeah. There you go. You came back.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, I
blame you.
I'm with you. Like I was thinking through all of this as you were kind of talking about it in terms of could I get like an RSS feed or watch blog posts and all of that? But you're right. There's so many services in Azure. I mean, it's hundreds. I'm guessing well over 600 or 700 now. And if I'm not using them, I don't want to have to sort through all these deprecation updates for things I don't care about. If I'm not using run as accounts in Azure automation, I don't need to know about them. And I don't want to have to keep track of what I'm using and what I'm not using. And I see a deprecation announcement and go look for it. And there's nothing in Azure. I was trying to think too, like the Message Center, Office 365 Message Center. There's a lot of announcements that come through there, but I do know they make, at least in some cases, an effort to only put messages in the Message Center for things they're detecting that you're using. Like when they got rid of, as they were getting rid of some of the legacy MFA ActiveSync stuff.
Yep.
People would get messages in the Message Center based on what Microsoft detected in terms of their endpoints connecting to these legacy ActiveSync, SMTP endpoints, basic authentication, that type of stuff. But there's nothing like that in Azure, is there? Where it's a message center of just, here's messages related to only the services that we're detecting you're using.
Well, you do get those messages as well. So the same emails that go out for things like a retirement notice based on telemetry, they also land as service health notifications. So you do get like a portal toast for them. You should see those. But again, I don't think most customers know to monitor that, or they haven't made it part of like their daily regimen to go in and set up alerting based on those service health notifications. Or do they have a user in the tenancy that's not the admin and the co-admin that have the right level of rights to go in there and see all that, right? Like have they restricted things so much where they say like, oh, I don't have subscription owners, I always have somebody running at a lower scope? Like there's a very real possibility that nobody ever sees that stuff. So like in an ideal world, you'd be able to have your service account be your subscription service administrator, your co-admin, whatever you need. Like those shouldn't need to be people, but you would have them with routable email addresses that at the very least, you could take that email address, you could use that email address to like forward that email someplace else and get it out in your support org because you knew it was coming. And then, yeah, you should do all the other healthy things. Like you should be checking service health, including service health notifications, all the kind of portal toast notifications, things that come out of these automated messaging systems. But if you're not doing that, or you're not going into Azure Advisor, if somebody chooses to spin up like an Azure Advisor recommendation or something, like it's just very easy to miss. And there's one consistent way that like I know of based on my experience to get everything, and it's to have a routable email address for at least one of those two accounts.
Got it. So that's the recommendation. Routable email on your admin, co-admin, and forward it maybe to a group mailbox or distribution list or something that all of your, because I would also argue that it shouldn't just be a couple of people. Like you almost want that to be some type of feed. Maybe you could even do, like if you're using Teams, have it posted as a message in Teams. Because you really would want all of your devs, admins, everybody that touches Azure from that management perspective to be able to see these, because you don't always realize what somebody else may or may not be using as they were building a particular application or architecting some new service. This should be widely distributed amongst your IT team.
Yes. Another thing that I just thought of here. So have you ever gone into the Azure portal, and when you sign into the Azure portal, it pops up a little box and it says, hey, do we have the right email address for you?
Yes.
Like,
I've seen that.
Can we send you marketing notifications? Like, hey, do we have your right email address?
That's probably why I ignore it, because it's usually marketing.
But it doesn't matter. Like I've also had customers that go in and say, hey, I updated that email address because it said to update it. So I did. It's like, yeah, you only updated that email address for marketing communications, and this is a service notification. So we're never going to use whatever that email address that you put there. We're always going to use the email address, effectively like the primary SMTP address out of Azure AD. So you got to make sure like it has an email address associated with it. It's routable. There's a mailbox there. And there's some way to take that message from the robot and get it out in front of the human.
Got it. Interesting. Definitely something. Again, I don't always think about this either. Again, telling clients, I need to make sure to remember to tell clients, but all of my Azure subscriptions, it's just my account that's the owner on them because I am a smaller org.
Well, so there's a difference. I think this is it too, is lots of us think about Azure in the ARM terms because it's been so grained into our heads about like what is Azure RBAC and what's an owner, what's a contributor, all those kinds of things. There's these legacy classic subscription administrator roles. And when I say classic, I mean like ASM, Azure Service Management.
Those. So do these get sent to those? They don't get sent. Do they get sent to owners too? Or is it only
no? No, they
classic
only
legacy.
they
Oh,
only get
okay.
sent to the service admin and the service co-admin, which are both valid things in ARM as well. So even though Classic is gone and deprecated, and those APIs have been around for a while, and customers are still potentially transitioning services away, those things all still exist. So for every Azure subscription, you can have one service administrator, and you can have up to 200 co-admins. So ideally, what you'd really want is that one service admin is, which is going to be the person who created the account, which if say you're like an enterprise customer and you're automating a subscription creation, there's a very good chance that it is a service account or something like that. That is the thing that you want to have ramped up and ready to go and configured the right way.
Got it.
And it was one of those crazy throwback learning things for me, because I remember from my consulting days and just being out there in the field with customers, it was a best practice not to have people doing these things, and it still is, right? But you gotta think about what are the downstream impacts of not having that there. And to me, this is a really tangible downstream impact in that you don't get things like retirement notices automatically, which could be impactful to you, especially for retirements that are fast tracked. Not all retirements happen in 3 years. Sometimes they happen in a year.
Yeah, so I just put a link to this in the Discord chat too. So this is if you're in a subscription and you go into your access control, your IAM, you have, and people do tend to live in these first few tabs, the check access, the role assignments, and the roles. But there is that last tab here, and it's that classic administrators. Right? And that's where I go and I see yep, I'm a service administrator, I'm a co-administrator. And even if I go click add, it's adding that co-administrator, not adding a role assignment in order to get these notifications.
Correct. Yes. So please, if you're an Azure customer and you're listening to this, go do the needful and figure it out. And if anybody has any better ideas, I'd love to hear them as well, because I would love to really make this better for all customers. I can totally see how it's a painful thing, and I don't like the customer pain piece of it, right? I'd be annoyed if I was a customer.
How do these emails, so as a customer and as we're thinking through this, how do these emails get generated? Could you have, just kind of thinking off the cuff here, some type of REST endpoint or webhook that gets pushed, similar to how you would push out these emails? And again, that's probably coming from some email marketing or from Office 365, wherever they're sent from, but some type of endpoint that you could potentially connect something like Logic Apps or Power Automate to.
Sure. Your service health notifications, right? That's your path to go down. You just have to figure out how to filter out the noise over there, because service health notifications are really service health, right? I have a virtual machine, and that virtual machine disk had a blip, or the machine itself had a blip. That's a service health notification. But there's also this class of notifications. It's hey, we noticed you're using SKU XYZ of this VM series, and that's deprecated, so you need to get off it within the next, N years kind of thing.
Right. If that pushed out to some endpoint, the way Service Health does, but it's much more of that fine-tuned to.
Well, you would just pull Service Health. I think you could do that.
You could do it.
It's a matter of how much do you have to build? What's the lower hanging fruit for you? Is it to align and license a mailbox for an administrator? Or is it to go build and maintain a Logic app over time that can do all that for you? It's the whole kind of it boils down to build versus buy. Is it cheaper for me to just go buy a mailbox with maybe an E1 license or something on it, spend a couple bucks a month and just be done with it? I just wipe my hands and it's okay.
You just need a service in Azure, something kind of like a template for Logic Apps that you can go deploy this template, and it just automatically points at that, looks for deprecations. You set up where you want them delivered to, Teams or email or something like that. something that's outside of those co-administrators and service administrators, where it's just a point and click, set this up and set where I want them delivered to.
Yeah, it's not like I said, it's not always an easy problem to solve though, because you don't want to introduce noise like needlessly, right? Like
But
if a subscription has 200 owners in it, that's awesome. All those 200 owners probably don't need to know about like, hey, this one esoteric service over here going away. But the admins do, because theoretically the admins would know what's going on in the subscriptions and who to reach out to and who to talk to. Like, so you've also got to balance, like, am I setting the right expectation with folks along the way? Like, you don't want to introduce like fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? Like, let's keep the FUD to a minimum. So I do think it's a weird kind of fine line thing. And I can understand why it is just initially an email to like, hey, let's start with like the cream of the crop, you know, the service admin and the co-admin. And then over time, let's disseminate it out in other places like service health notifications. Yep. Let's do the post on Azure updates, all those kinds of things. Let's have ongoing communications and ongoing mechanisms to try and make sure that, you know, we're making customers aware of this.
There's got to be an ISV out there that wants to go build this, like some interface where you can subscribe. Isn't that you? To service.
You're
health.
An ISV. Come on.
Yeah, but I don't have time. Unless there's a developer that wants to come build this for me, and we can figure out how to charge for it. But something that would like let the end user go in and subscribe of, these are the services I want to see. This is what the announcements I want to see, whether it's a blip level. Like, I think of the whole logging thing. Do I want to see informational versus errors versus warnings versus deprecations? And this is how I, as a user, want to get them. Me, Ben, I want to go look at these services, these type of announcements, and I want it delivered as a Teams chat, or I want it delivered as an email, or it'd
be a nifty feature to have. You know, would endorse if it existed.
If it, all right, developer that wants to build it, and Scott, well, you probably can't market it. You're Microsoft. I'll market it. The podcast will market it.
What wasn't my idea?
All right, sounds good. Well, with that, Scott, I'm going to go write some documentation.
All right. Well,
nothing better to do on a Friday evening than write a document.
Absolutely. Yuck. All right. Well, I will let you go. As always, thank you. And we'll chat again next week.
All right. Thank you.